Anyway, um, so thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks for your interest in my work. That's really exciting. I have to say that the response of the community here in Cumberland has been really sort of energizing for me as an artist. It's like, wow, people are going to the show. They're sending me messages. They're calling me up. And that means a lot to artists. I'm sure I'm speaking for other artists as well. It's a lot about the community. And for those of you who know me, you know that I really have fond feelings for this arts community. I think we have a great arts community here, and that community is you folks, people that come out. You take time out of your day to pay attention to what's going on, and that's why we have a thriving arts community. That, along with hardworking people like Julie and her staff who keep the Arts Council going. So thanks again for coming out. So I want to talk a little bit about my background, not so much my career as where where I'm coming from in terms of my art perspective. So I've always been, let's see, I got to share my screen now. Hang on.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so I've always been a big fan of the Renaissance, and one of the reasons is that these artists, not all of them, but a lot of them were seriously interested in science, and in this sense, they wanted to understand the world better. So they they wanted to understand how to bring the three-dimensional world into onto two-dimensional canvases, as well as into architecture. They wanted to understand how to depict nature. So measuring things, checking proportions, in this case, learning projective geometry, like how perspective works. These are the kinds of things that they were doing. And, they weren't just drawing pictures. These guys they were writing books. I mean, you've probably seen Leonardo's notebooks. There's hundreds and hundreds of pages of this stuff. The same with Albrecht Dürer, the same with Piero della Francesca. These guys were really serious about geometry, mathematics, and many other topics. So that sort of perspective, no pun intended, excites me, because I find a kinship with those artists, because they were always curious, and I find myself the same. I'm just curious about how the world works, and I feel strongly that the more we understand about how it works, in other words, the more we understand about science, the better we'll be able to deal with current problems and solve problems that are facing us in the future. So some of I've been heavily involved in the Arts Council's STEAM program, and that's really one of the reasons. One of the reasons is that interest in generating excitement about science. But the other reason, of course, out here is I want to reach out to the community, which sometimes is plagued by a lack of hope for a future. And I think the arts, particularly the entertainment industry, the digital arts, and the way those arts connect to science is a great way to get kids excited about potential careers, and sort of look beyond what might be on their plate right now. So that's my spiel about where I'm coming from. I think what you'll see as I go through the exhibit is that theme comes back again and again. In fact, the name of the show, Salient Points, sort of derives from that perspective. So salient points, it's a translation of an expression, punctum saliens, which is Latin. And it's, I guess, back in the Roman days or whenever, they came up with this concept of it's like a turning point. It's one point. It's almost, I think of it visually. I think of it sort of like there's a graph line, and you reach a point where it either goes up or it goes down. And the decisions you make at that point determine which way the line goes. So salient points, that's what I'm referring to when I use salient points in the title. And then of course I tagged on thoughts about the future of humanity, because that's the framework within which all this artwork was done. So the first part of the show I want to take you to is is one of the three themes. There are three themes. One is the victory of science, another is the invisible domain, and another is extinction. So victory of science are these paintings. They're all 30 inches by 40 inches. And look, Sandy, you can still buy this one. In any case, these are all, so they're fairly big. And what they are really is simple sort of explorations of technologies, science-related technology in a way that sort of borders on abstractions. Because I didn't, in this case, we're dealing with pieces of jets and jet engines. It's sort of like a montage. It's all sort of crammed together, but there's a certain point in my process of pushing these things together and pulling them this way and giving them color, where it all kind of clicks together, and I say, okay, that's it. And that's when I start to paint. Prior to that, it's working with a lot of different images, and I'll show you. In this case, this one's based on a satellite, and a starting point for that work might be something like this, where I grabbed a 3D model of a satellite and twirled it around, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 times to make this rosette. And in the process of doing that, I noticed this really interesting thing going on in the middle here, which you probably recognize somewhat in the final painting. So this might be a starting point, but I would never sort of stop there and just copy that. What I want to do is sort of push beyond that and look for more ways for it to become a little bit more less concrete. Like I enjoy actually that people look at this and they don't quite know what it is. They say, well, that's familiar. Not many people guess that it's a satellite. Keeping on the space theme, here's a bunch of turbines. Here again, this was an interesting exploration, because when I started this painting, I didn't really expect to paint something so dark. It's not very usual for me to paint something so dark, but that's just the direction it went. And the more I played with the light on these metallic pieces, the more I felt like, well, there's really something happening there, and I kept going. This was the last one in that series that I did. I want to do more of this series, because there are a lot of things I haven't touched on. I've got space, energy, biotech. This one's energy. This one's called nuclear. I want to, part of the reason I did one called nuclear is because I worked at National Geographic for many years, and for many years they did a lot of stories about the environment and climate change and so on, global warming. And initially, like in the early to mid 90s, I would say the environment editors at National Geographic were very anti-nuclear, and I knew from previous work that it was actually a relatively clean energy source. It's not ideal by any stretch, but it was interesting to see a shift at National Geographic where at a certain point, nuclear energy became sort of a necessary evil. But I'm interested in pushing beyond the fission reactors, which is what we have today, to a process called fusion. It's very different and it requires a tremendous amount of energy to get energy out of it. But it's basically like harnessing the nuclear reactions of the sun and bringing them down to Earth. So and it has very little, if any, radioactive waste. So that's where these things are coming from. And this one's about biotech. It's a bunch of bottles just thrown together in interesting ways, refracting light. But I hope
Chris, this is Julie. Would you just double check and see if we have anybody still sitting in the waiting room? Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, let's see. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Okay, yeah, so I'll get back. Okay. I want to do more pieces on space, for instance. I'm very excited about what is happening at NASA and SpaceX. Even the Chinese are getting to the moon. So that it reminds me of the Apollo program days when there was actually people interested in getting into space. Okay. The second part of the exhibition I want to take you through is invisible domain. Now, I know that some of you have been through this before, so I apologize for that. I'll try to add. I'll try to say some new things. So, the invisible domain was the product of a arts fellowship at Johns Hopkins Extreme Materials Institute in 2019. The opportunity was to work with Hopkins researchers and collaborate with them on visualizing what they did, not in terms of scientific visualization, but in terms of an artistic visualization. So the way this works is or what I did is I sent out a bunch of messages to researchers saying, would they be interested in working with me? I told them what I was interested in, which was imagining what the world of molecules, atoms, and subatomic particles might look like if we could see it. And of course, we can't see it, but that's part of the fun. So several researchers got back to me. I ended up working with 3 people, one of whom was working on adhesion. So this series is called Polymeria because it's based on polymer research. So what you're seeing here are chains of molecules called polymers that are stretching between 2 surfaces that have been attached. Now, obviously, it doesn't look anything like this in reality, but I was intrigued by the fact that scientists don't completely understand what goes on between the 2 pieces of paper that make up a Post-it note. Like when you pull those apart, like what's actually going on at a molecular level? That's a big area of research. People or companies like DuPont are pouring zillions of dollars into these things because obviously if you can make more sticky or less sticky surfaces, it's a big deal. So these 3 pieces here are from that series. And I'm going to share with you this image here. This is from their research lab. This is a picture they took using a high-powered microscope. And what you see here is they're looking at a polymer between 2 surfaces. And you can see this shape here. that's the shape I'm imitating. And this is a top view of the same shape. You can see how there are these strands where you're doing a cross section. These are strands of polymer molecules that are lining this thing here. So that's where these images are coming from. And one other thing I should say is part of the challenge of this whole project was figuring out how to depict atoms and molecules. So you're probably, well, I'm sure everybody's familiar with these sorts of things, the sticks and balls. You know, I was very dissatisfied with that. I understand that they're a great heuristic device, but they don't really help because we know that really these are, you know, what we're looking at here is energy, not sticks and balls. So I did a lot of sketching. Like this is how this project starts, with a lot of sketches, trying to think about, well, how do I show these bundles of energy? And I ended up creating a model. This is a three-dimensional model that I printed out on a three-dimensional printer. And what this is about, it's not perfect, but what this is about is the big balls represent nodules of energy, so to speak, or foci of energy. This one would have less energy. This one would have a little less energy, but enough to grab this atom, and that atom's attached to this atom. So you could think of this as, you know, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, you know, oxygen, carbon, and so on. So that's the way crystal lattices and things like that are set up. The problem with this model, of course, is that all these interactions are happening, you know, spherically. They're three-dimensional, you know, they're very three-dimensional, happening at 360 degrees, you know, rotation in every direction. So this is very much an approximation and not a great one, but the researchers had no problem with it. They said, okay, you know, go with it. So these, what you see here is those energy nodules, I call them, or foci, are being stretched. And you can see it better in this next image. Yeah, here you can see how when they're at the center of the stretching, they're more spherical shape, but as they get out toward the end, they stretch into these oval shapes, and then they actually break apart. So these loose strands are polymers that have been set free, so to speak. I always like this one because.
Can I ask a question, Chris? So basically, this is your interpretation of what you perceive. It is not basically what is ultimately happening on a molecular level, but basically your interpretation of what is happening under a molecular level.
Yes, with the caveat that I'm not being too literal.
Thank you.
So
you're basically taking it to an artistic point of view, but fundamentally, you begin with an initial structure and then manipulate that towards a certain enhancement that becomes a piece of art.
Yeah, I think you could appreciate this. It's there's a lot of sort of sciencey things going on at the beginning, but at a certain point, I have to turn that off.
Sure.
And just go for beauty.
Yes.
And I found this shape beautiful. So I really enjoyed working with this shape. And one of the rewarding things is that after these pieces were done, the researchers and grad students who I was working with came up to me and said, you know, I never I never thought about it that way, but that's really cool. You know, now I'm excited to get back to work. So, you know, it's very interesting how different people respond to these things. This image here is a three-dimensional, I mean, well, it's obviously three-dimensional. It's a 3D printout of a very simple version of this polymer stretching. So of all the pieces, this is one of the more literal where this is, you know, representing a piece of paper, I suppose, and this as well, and the polymer is stretching between them. But it was such a fun shape, I decided to just keep it simple and do that. So this is rhodium plated brass. So this is the first time I've ever been able to print out something as a 3D model and then have it turned into metal. So that was a big learning experience for me. It took probably about 6 months to get this thing out of the printer. Yeah. So another researcher I was working with laser light, or laser beams, I should say, and crystal lattices, specifically glass. And he said that he's got, I guess, Defense Department contracts to try to make glass so pure, like I'm talking about thick glass, like, you know, the kind of 3-inch thick glass that you might have in a tank window or something like that, or like in a spacecraft window. They wanted to make the glass so pure that a laser beam could go through the crystal lattice and not hit anything, just go straight through. So here's a sketch that I started with and showed the researcher and his postdocs. The idea was to show lasers hitting, they're actually scattering because they're impurities in the glass. So what they're trying to do is essentially eliminate the impurities. So here's an early model. You can recognize this this shape, but then I had to take into account that this is not really a crystal lattice. So I wanted to go a little bit further. You can see here I'm playing around with the laser light bouncing through it. So, and they actually gave me this picture of what one of their experiments looks like. So this is some kind of a photograph. I forget what kind, I'm sorry, but taken of their work. And that sort of inspired me to do these pieces. Well, first I made this. This is a lattice made from those shapes, and it's hard to see, but right here there's an octahedron. There's a couple of them in here. That's meant to represent the impurities. And in the gallery, we have a green laser shooting at this thing, and you can see if the laser moves a little bit, or if this table shakes a little bit, you can see the green light dancing all around and then passing through. But this piece here is a close-up view of all this happening, where there's laser beams bouncing all over the place in here. And let's see. And then this piece here is the same, but with the green laser. And something I mentioned to Sandy the other day when we were in the gallery was that the title of this show was Explorations of the Invisible Domain. And I always felt like it was sort of like that movie, The Fantastic Journey, where you're like going in, you know, into something microscopic. So I had fun with that, and I imagined myself in these scenes. So in every one of these pieces, there's a reflection of me in one of these balls or some area. Or if it's not a reflection, it might be a cast shadow. So there's a person there doing the exploring. So this next piece is based on the research of a fellow who was studying uh, the rapid changes of phase in matter. So, for instance, ice turning to water. Now he was working with metals, and he was interested in, or he was not interested, he was able to have metals change from liquid, from solid to liquid and back again to solid as fast as electricity could go. So, it usually takes a long time for ice to melt. And of course, you can make it melt faster. But here's a guy who was working with these materials on a level where you could actually use the principles that he was working with to create computer switches and things like that for quantum computing and other things where you need really, really, really fast on-off kind of action. So what you see in this image is a crystal lattice up here representing the solid. And these loopy things down here, like the polymers, are molecules stretching, being stretched to the max and actually breaking apart. These floating pieces are atoms that have been freed from their molecular bonds. And in one of the sketches I sent to this researcher, I sort of whimsically stuck in a fish in the water. And when I asked him which of the sketches he liked, he said, "I like the one with the fish." So I was very pleased because the fish, I felt like, really adds something to the image, and also helps connote liquid.
Question.
Yeah.
How did you choose your colors? And why did you choose your colors? Obviously, there's no color.
Yes.
That area of life.
Yeah, I think blue came because I was thinking ice and water. So I think it's always been blue, although there were some images that were all gold that were pretty cool looking. But that's the reason why. And then gold, of course, orange is a nice complement of blue, so it just really pops out of there. So the blue,
and
in a
then
way,
your shadows, you selected your shadows dramatically
yeah,
in order to accentuate your lights. So how did you go about that?
Well, that is a real hit and miss thing. Because the way that you illuminate something like this is you put it in what's called a dome, and then you put a texture on the dome, and you can see that back here. You see this fuzzy, shadowy area back there? That's actually a texture on a big dome that you can't see, but the light is coming through that dome. And the process of creating this sort of lighting is basically spinning that dome so you get the light and shadow in different places, and also changing the lighting. So hours and hours are spent just fiddling with it. And Chayo, you don't know what it's going to look like until you push the button.
Yeah.
It's all wireframe, and there's no color when you're working with these things. And it's a maze of colorless stuff, and you just have to use your intuition and dumb luck, frankly, in some cases. But literally, dozens and dozens of hours of testing. Yeah. So, thanks for that question. This other piece, I was fascinated with the idea of sort of looking up from beneath. We have a koi pond in the backyard. I love the koi, and this reminded me of a koi sort of swimming, looking for some food. So I added a morsel up here as an atom. And I think if you look closely, you might be able to see myself reflected in that ball. Anyway, I like this perspective. Okay, and in the show, I wasn't able to take a picture of it, but in the show, there's actually one of these brass sculptures of using that model as the basis. Okay, well, now we'll move on to extinctions, which is the most recent project that I was working on. We'll start with this piece here. I started this a couple of years ago, specifically because I was reading more and more articles about how the rate of extinction was increasing, and there were some pretty dire reports out there, some of which said that by 2050 we'd be losing 50% of species presently on Earth. Just horrifying statistics. And I've always been an animal person, so that was particularly enraging to me because there are a lot of ways of managing this problem, but the world the way it is, it's just been very difficult to get on top of this problem. So I wanted to just like I want to raise public awareness and curiosity about subatomic things and the sciences, I wanted to raise awareness and concern about extinctions because this potentially, not potential, I should say, this has, extinctions have consequences, direct consequences for humans. So one of my first choices was a condor, because I grew up in California, and when I was a kid, condors were on the verge of extinction back then. And it's sort of disappointing to hear that they're still having trouble. There are 160 California condor left. But the reason I wanted to start with this image is because it started me on a track that impacted all the other pieces. So if you think about it, well, you look at these eyes down here. These eyes are looking at you, right? So I wanted all these pieces to be engaging. And one way to engage with people is, you know this from portraiture, have those eyes looking right at you. The problem with a condor is that its eyes are on the side of its head, right? So how do you do this? Well, the only way to do it really is to pull its eyes to the side, literally sort of bend it. So I started warping these animals so they could look right at us. Another example is this hawksbill turtle. Another early piece where hawksbills have eyes on the side of their heads as well, so they can't possibly look at you like this. So it's almost like I split the turtle here and pulled the eyes around so they could be looking right at you. I wanted to put humanity on the spot, and there are about 8,000 hawksbill turtles left. Another early one was this leopard, the armor leopard. There's 100 left in China. And this piece, again, I'm using that split head technique, for lack of a better word. And if you look carefully, I was showing this to some people the other night. If you look carefully, like that's one animal on the left there, and that's another animal on the right. So those actually look more normal than the whole thing. But I found myself attracted to this idea that these animals don't look normal. There's something slightly wrong with them, and that was a good poetic connection to what's actually going on, because something's not right with nature. Something's very not right with nature. So sticking with that idea, here's the Javan rhinoceros. And there are 60 of these beautiful animals left. And Harlequin frog. So here I didn't split the animal anymore, right? Excuse me, I didn't split the animal. I just started distorting them. sometimes in sort of gruesome ways. I ended up with a three-eyed, three-nostrilled mountain gorilla.
Bob, do you want to join? No, he's still talking. But you can.
600. 600 left. The mountain bongo is a beautiful animal.
Oh,
100 left.
Pants are pants. I'll see. I mean,
So here's another example of extreme distortion where the animal's head is not nearly this long. The horns obviously don't go off to the side. And these striking patterns I turned into a woven kind of knot on the tail rather than just let them stay as bands. This is one of my favorites, the northern white-cheeked gibbon. I've always had a soft spot for apes and monkeys. 450 left. So here I've blended a male and a female, and it just struck me, since the issue is extinction, why not put a baby down here, very worried looking baby. And I just wanted to point out another thing that started to happen as I was doing more of these is, remember I mentioned how in the Invisible Domain series, I started to put myself in the painting. But here I wanted to put people in the painting. So if you look in the eyes of these animals, you can see the reflection. Usually it's just a silhouette like this of a standing person. That's you. These guys are looking at you.
Chris, did you sketch this first before you did these? Because these are the oil on canvas, which,
Yeah.
you know, is your original design, kind of.
Yeah. No, these are all sketched up, and there's a lot of overlays involved. Like here, for instance, this beautiful animal, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but I took the tracing paper and drew it this way, then flipped it over and drew it this way. So it's the same animal coming at it from two different directions. And you can see the reflection again of a human. But this animal, I'll show you. It's really a sad story. This thing was discovered only recently in the hills of Vietnam and Laos. And they don't know how many are left. And I'm not sure in this picture, this animal does not look very well. It might be dead, I'm not sure, but you can see these striking markings on its head. There's only 70 of these things left, as far as they can tell. So the stories of these animals are just very distressing. But I just love those patterns, and it was really serendipity when I put those two images overlapped, and I saw how there'd be this interesting sort of geometry created if I put their eye on the same spot. That kind of stuff happens sort of naturally with this process. And the same thing goes with something like this, the European eel. Now, this is one that surprised me. The European eel, like I thought there were thousands and thousands of them, but actually they're going extinct. They're on the critically endangered list. All the animals in this extinction show are critically endangered. And they don't even know how many European eels are left. It's sort of hard to count them. They're in the water. But they're tracking a 98% decline in their numbers. So this is a little painting. I had a lot of fun with these little paintings. Here again, it's very similar to what I did with the Saola, where I just overlapped two sketches. And in doing that, I created this, what's almost like a third image. You see it's sort of a frog looking thing in the middle. It's sort of fun to see that. But I kind of like those accidental abstract things that are happening in this work. This animal's of Akita. Now, for those of you not familiar with Akita, it's probably the saddest story of all these guys. It's a cute little porpoise. It lives in the Gulf of California, Baja, off Baja, California. It's a little thing, cute thing, 10. There's 10 left. You might have seen a documentary on these guys. But anyway, I thought their faces were so cute. I zeroed in on the face because, again, I wanted that eye. And I also wanted that sort of, that little bit of a smile that dolphins have. Because this is a gentle creature that never hurt anybody, that, that's getting killed off. It's not going to survive. So let's see. Sometime the close button gets out of my reach. Hang on. There. I'll just end on, let me show you this whale thing, and then I have one more. Okay, so all those paintings that you've seen so far were fairly small in size, and I was really excited about doing a big one. So I thought, well, what more appropriate than to do a whale? And I discovered that the North Atlantic right whale is extremely endangered. There's 360 left. And there's other right whales, but the North Atlantic right whale is on its way out. So I did this painting. It's 7 feet by 7 feet. It hangs in the middle of the gallery. Julie did a great job sort of making it a showstopper there right in the middle. But I'm using a whole bunch of different metaphors here. One is this transparency of the whales. So they're all fading, they're all disappearing. And it's such an incredible animal. The scale of it is shown here by these anchovies or sardines swimming in front of it. But if you zoom in, I can't zoom in here, but if you zoom in, you can see these eyes, once again, are looking right at you. So the only painting, let me rephrase that. The painting that I did on the day, or right around the day that the pandemic became the pandemic, was this one. We reap what we sow, and it was done in the spirit of the Extinction series, even though it feels very different. Because as soon as I heard that there's a pandemic that's going to, wash over the whole world, I said, you know what, we brought that on ourselves. Yeah. It's poor economic conditions. Why are people, messing around with, food that's been affected by bats and, all this crazy stuff that causes viruses to leap from one to another? It's because we're not taking care of ourselves. We're not taking care of the planet. So I was really angry. And this painting is saying, well, we asked for it. We're back here, we're burning the rainforest at horrifying rates. We're polluting the environment with just incessant burning of fossil fuels. And we're squeezing blood out of a stone right up here. It's hard to see, but there's blood dripping out of a stone that this skeleton is grabbing, and he's crying out like, stop, we've got to stop. So it's not all doom and gloom, however. The Francisco Goya used this theme a couple times in his work of a city on a hill. So I use that device here. This is hope. This is where we should be. This is our destination. This is our future. And so what I'm saying here is, like, it's not over, folks. It's not game over. It's like we have to make sure that this turning point turns in the right direction. We all have a responsibility to make sure it goes in that direction, and we'll get here someday. So with that, I'll close and hand it back to you guys and to Julie. I thank you so much for your kind attention.
So at this point, we have about 10 minutes left. So we'll just open the floor to anyone that has some thoughts or feedback. I see we have one thing in our chat box to start. Chris, This is from Tom Bowling. He said, I'd be interested in having Chris reflect on the experiences that were most influential in shaping his approach to his artistic expression.
That's interesting. I would say that I'm not sure if you're talking about the influence of those Renaissance masters on me, or the influences that I currently experience in shaping the work. Could you tell me which you were asking about?
Sure, I think both. I mean, experiences in terms of formative experiences that shaped you early in your career, but also more recent experiences.
Okay. So regarding early experiences, I was very, very lucky. When I went to school, I was one of those people who was torn between the arts and sciences. And I started off as a zoology major at Oregon State University, and realized that I really wasn't all that interested in learning chemistry, which was one of the requirements. So I said, okay, well, that tips the balance in favor of art. So long story short, I found myself in New York City, and I hooked up with a group of artists that was, it was like a working group of artists. And we would meet probably once a month. And we were all really interested in learning more about classical art. And we just ate up all those, everything we could find on the Renaissance artists. And personally, I was probably a bit harder than other people, but I was fascinated with perspective. I wanted to learn everything I could about that. I went through Leonardo's notebooks time and time again, and was frustrated that they were translated so poorly. So all those guys became those Renaissance artists became my idols, and I've always had that sort of in my bloodstream. More recently, I would say that sort of orientation has expressed itself in sort of a frustrating way, which is that I'm interested in so many different kinds of artistic expression. I mentioned earlier that I do 3D modeling, we've got 3D printing, we've got oil painting, we've got etching, which I haven't shown any of here, but they're all fascinating to me. But the common denominator of all that stuff is that I don't want to be, like, even though I feel like I'm always launching polemics, I don't want to be too polemical or didactic. I want, as Chayo pointed out earlier, this is art. I want this to sort of be more poetic. I want this to mean different things to different people. Even though I have a message, I want people to enjoy it as beautiful and just let it be what it is to them. So I really appreciate people who just like it for what it is. And I get a lot of enjoyment out of that process.
Thanks, Tom. Anybody else have a comment or question, either in chat or feel free to just blurt it out at this point?
Hi, I missed the beginning. Who and where are these researchers that you were engaged with the molecular sort of stuff?
These guys were at the Hopkins Extreme Materials Institute in Baltimore.
Okay, thanks.
Chris, the last painting that you showed, towards the bottom, there was some orange and yellow. Did that signify something? Was that like the sun, or did it have any meaning as far as?
Was it on the horizon?
Yeah, I think so, but
Yeah, I think you might be referring to the
it was the skeleton one.
yeah, to this area.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's burning rainforest.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
There you go.
I guess I'd like to ask you a bit about the technical way that you approach this, you know, in the basically, the larger paintings seem to be almost untouched as far as your brushwork was concerned, even though I did see that bottom line, you seem to have painted underneath, let that particular level subside, and then you approach, you know, what I think what I'm trying to say, Chris, is what everything just looks like it's almost airbrushed. And I'm not going to get a chance to basically talk technique with you, but did you work in layers, or did you work with very, very thin oil, or did you work with airbrush?
No airbrush. I work in thin oils.
Thin oil.
And so basically you start off with a blank canvas. Often I start dark and just build that up in layers. Unfortunately, most often I change my mind as I'm going along. So things will change quite a bit. Like the whales, for instance, I couldn't decide how many whales there should be. So, there were like 5 whales, then there were 4, then there were 3. So if somebody ever did a X-ray picture or something of that painting, they'd see a lot going on under those whales. But I use a lot of glazes because I like the sort of transparency that you can get with that. And you're right, I do paint very smoothly, but a lot of that has to do with the fact that I really like light and the relief. I like rendering relief and the gradations of shadow.
Fabulous. I mean, it just
Question.
looks
Thank you.
flawless. And I thought your skeleton piece was absolutely unique. It just seemed flawless, and it just popped out so beautiful. It was majestic. It truly was. And I have to say thank you for giving us that experience, Chris. Really was dynamic. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
I have a
Chris,
question,
I have a
Chris.
question. Oh, go ahead.
On the Invisible Domain series, is that all in Photoshop? Is that the program you're using on that?
Photoshop's involved, but actually it's there's very little Photoshop. It's mainly 3D modeling and rendering in Maya.
Maya. Mhm.
So all those things are 3-dimensional. You could, and part of the process I was describing earlier about the lighting, that's one part. Another part is manipulating the objects that you create, and another one is figuring out where you want to look at everything from.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Okay.
when you, like I said earlier, when you push that button, you don't really know what you're going to get till it comes out. And each time you have to wait 8 or 9 hours
Wow.
before you see what you got.
Mhm. Wow.
So these are stored somewhere on a hard drive that you have that you could further manipulate them to render. They're all the Invisible Domain series seem to be in 30 by 50 dimension.
That's right.
They presumably could be rendered smaller or larger.
Yes, that's right. But each time I print them, and I haven't done this yet, but each time I print them, I don't want there to be a lot of prints out there, so they'll be signed and numbered, and there won't be any more of this 30 by 50 series.
I think Anne had a question next.
Yeah. Chris, so you may have covered this earlier and I missed it, but you're such an accomplished artist. your technique and mastery of paint, but you've not worked as an artist, right? I mean, you've done other things artistic, but have you painted all along, or were you trained as an artist and then went into other areas, or?
Oregon State University.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've basically been drawing and painting all my life. I was a freelance illustrator. I've done a lot of science illustration, historical reconstructions, but what's new is the fine art. You know, painting large and not on commission, just painting for myself.
Right. You have a nice mastery of color, good color sense, and I've seen some of your landscapes too, and you really explore a lot of different subjects.
Thanks. Well,
Wow.
you know, one thing that I've learned that I'll share with you guys is if you expose yourself to lots and lots of images, as I have over my life as an art director, you develop an internal sense. I'm sure you experience this as a designer. You know what looks good, you know what's a little bit off. So I think that experience for me has really paid off, because I've got a big data bank, so to speak, in my brain of things that work. I've seen so many images, and now I have a chance for it to all come out.
Very good.
Anybody else have a comment or question they might want to ask? Yeah, Jim, please. Jim, you're muted, so if you turn on your microphone. There you go.
Chris, I didn't understand much of any
Jim?
of your pieces until you explained them. You know, I guess one of the examples is the question that somebody asked about the little fire, and that was a forest fire. I mean, so the question is that are some of your pieces just too complex for, to appreciate?
Well, I don't know if I'm the one to answer that. Well, like I said earlier, I guess I'll answer it this way. Like I said earlier, what's important to me is that people enjoy looking at the art and that it's beautiful to them, and whether they care about, subatomic physics or not doesn't really matter as much to me. My whole work is about getting people interested in these things, and no matter what level. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Well, okay, but in order to appreciate it at the deeper levels that you, in which you created them, I guess maybe a booklet would be needed or something. I mean, they were certainly all beautiful, but to understand what inspired you, I didn't understand any of it until you explained it tonight.
So maybe I should have had a booklet. I had posters.
I will say, Jim, to your point, and I don't know if you were able to come into the physical exhibition, but we did have a series of posters and wall art that kind of explored the three particular segments of the exhibition, and those were very well received by people in the gallery because the work is so technical in nature. So Chris, thank you for doing that. But of course, it's pretty deep.
Well, I was worried that, at a certain point it's too much, right? So I tried to strike a balance with this show. Just, if people are interested, like Jim, they can ask.
Yeah. I will tell you, just from being in the gallery, each day. It is really one of the most stunning exhibitions I have ever seen. I mean, even if you have absolutely no idea what any of the pieces represent, just the color and the size, you know, the scale of the pieces is really magnificent. It's been a real honor having it. I'm going to be sad to see it go.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah.
that. I appreciate you pulling this together as well.
Well, of course. Anybody else? I think we have something else in our chat room. Okay, just some thanks, Chris. Thank you. Thanks for joining. It doesn't look like we have any other questions, so just wrap up. Oh, Sandy, I think you did have a question, please.
I was just saying, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thanks, Sandy. Thanks,
I
everybody, for
forgot
coming
a
out.
little bit of this.
Thank you, Chris.
But
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris.
Good night,
Yeah.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thanks so much.
Hey guys, you can check out the digital gallery for about 12 more hours on our website if you want to poke around a little bit yourself. And you can always call me if you have an interest in looking at something particular through the next month. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we look forward to the next time.
thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.